Good morning, everyone. I'm Cole Cooksey, and I decided to do my cell communication project on PCOS, or polycystic ovarian syndrome. To preface this, I'll say for the first 2 months of us doing this project, I had no idea if this was a cell communication disorder or not. I think I figured it out though. So, cell communication. So a little background on cell communication. To sum it up, it's how our cells talk to each other. It's how they get information from one place to another. So it can be split into two different types. You have local cell signaling and you have long distance cell signaling. And if you were to break those down anymore, local would be like mom telling dad to go do something and him doing it, which he does. And then long distance would be like you writing a letter to someone and sending it through the mail. So it's a longer process, but you're still getting the information from one place to another. Cell communication is then broken down into 3 stages. You have reception, transduction, and response. So your reception is through receptor proteins like this that are on the outside of a cell. So once one cell sends the signal, it binds with the molecule, the signal molecule, binds with the receptor protein, which then goes through the process of transduction, and then you have a cellular response, which could be really anything. So cell metabolism, metabolic processes, or even the cell dying. Sometimes the signal is needed to tell the cell to die. This picture, is it on my board? It's not. Never mind. Where? It showed me it's right there. Look at that. Okay, so a little brief history on PCOS. One of the earliest records I found of PCOS being acknowledged was actually from the Greek physician Hippocrates. And I have a little quote by him, and it says, this was his quote exactly, it says, "But those whose menstruation is less than 3 days or is meager are robust with a healthy complexion and a masculine appearance. Yet they are not concerned about bearing children, nor do they become pregnant," which is one of the first, characteristics of PCOS, which is infertility. Later, it was characterized as polycystic ovarian syndrome by Freiler Stein and Michael Leventhal, who were 2 physicians in the Americas, I'm pretty sure, who ran a lot of studies and had a lot of specimens of polycystic ovaries, and that's when they first recognized that as one of the main causes and cases. And they were the first ones to call it polycystic ovarian syndrome. But why did I pick PCOS? So I am pretty avid on reproductive health care, and I think it's really sad to know that there's some women all over the world who will never get to experience motherhood because of a lack of fertility care and things of that nature. And then PCOS, of course, it can lead to endometrial cancer. And for this statistic up here at the top, an estimated 8 to 13% of women worldwide have PCOS. And that's about 7 to 17, 1 in every 7 to 17. But 70% of those women do not know that they have PCOS. So that kind of, to sum that all up, if you're at higher risk for endometrial cancer and you don't know you have this disease, it would be even more of a surprise to find out, oh, you have cancer, but we could have prevented it, but we didn't know. So now, why it's a cell communication disorder. Wait, did I skip one? Yes, I did. So, the way PCOS works, it's an endocrine-based disorder, meaning it involves your hormones. So that means it's a long-distance cell signaling issue because a hormone is sent from your brain to another part of your body where a process occurs. So in your brain, you have the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus produces a hormone called GnRH, which stands for gonadotropin releasing hormone. This hormone then travels from the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland, where it tells the pituitary gland to produce FSH and LH. FSH stands for follicle-stimulating hormone, and then LH stands for luteinizing hormone. Both of these hormones then travel to the ovaries, where the FSH tells the ovaries to prepare a follicle to house an egg, and the LH travels to a theca cell, which is also in the ovaries, another part of a follicle, and it tells it to produce androgens, which then will be later turned into estrogen through another process we'll get into here in a second. So yeah, that's mainly it. Here is another image. This is more zoomed in of the ovary. So the FSH will travel to these cells right here. They're called granulosa cells. And it tells them to prepare the follicle to house an egg. And then the LH travels to these cells, which are called thecal cells, and that's where the androgens are produced. The androgens are produced through a process called steroidogenesis. So in this process, the LH starts the reaction and it changes cholesterol into testosterone. Okay? Here is an image that's also on my board of the process of steroidogenesis. So if you see here, this is the theca cells. The LH up here binds to the luteinizing hormone receptor, where it then triggers a process that will take this cholesterol and transform it into testosterone. The testosterone will then travel to another cell, also in the ovaries, called the granulosa cells, where the FSH will bind to the FSH receptor, and it will create aromatase, which will then transform this testosterone into estradiol, which is a form of estrogen. Here's another image of the same process. It's just another, pathway that it follows. It's the same thing. And if you see, I really like this. The reason I picked this one is because you can kind of see the receptors a little bit better and how they would probably more likely look. But why though? We know what's wrong, we know the problem, but why does this problem occur? Well, with most things, there's some sort of environmental factor that can lead to this and can not lead to it, but worsen it, I guess. So one of the main things that doctors characterize with PCOS is weight. Those two, for some reason, go hand in hand, which I can see why, but it's also not necessary, because a lot of doctors, the first thing that a patient's told when they're diagnosed with PCOS is that you need to lose weight. But if you're already at an average weight or you're underweight, you don't need to lose weight. But I found out the reason why. Fat cells, which make up a tissue called adipose tissue, produce a form of estrogen called estrone, and that estrogen can lead to the process, the hormone imbalance just being worsened. And then another environmental factor is smoking, because smoking, it messes up your metabolic processes. So the cholesterol being transformed into testosterone is a metabolic process, so it would only worsen that from being able to happen. And of course, for the longest time, I did not know if there was a genetic cause to it, but I found some that doctors believe could contribute to PCOS. And all of these images are also on my board if you need to come take a better look at it. So there was about 11 that I found, but I'm only going to be going over 3 today, because these were the 3 that I saw the most, made the most sense to me. So this first one is called CYP11A1, and it's found on chromosome 15, and it's about right here where the mutation occurs. Oh, okay, we didn't have to do that, but thanks. And what it does is it messes up the mutation, causes this protein to not be formed. So I think it's actually the enzyme that it messes with, so it doesn't allow the cholesterol to be transformed into pregnenolone. Okay, so that was the very first process in steroidogenesis, is the cholesterol being transformed into something else, being broken down, per se. The next one is CYP17A1, which is found on chromosome 10, and it's about right, it's about right there, somewhere in there. And it is responsible for creating the enzyme that takes that pregnenolone and transforms it into the next protein or molecule responsible in that steroidogenesis process. So if this can't be broken down into this, the process can't continue. And then we're going to go to the next one, which is CYP19A1. And it's about right here somewhere, about 21 or so. And it's responsible in the FSH process, which is in the other cell, and it's responsible for creating the enzyme aromatase, which breaks down the testosterone into the estrogen-based hormone. So what are some signs and symptoms of PCOS? So some of the initial ones and most characterized symptoms of PCOS are oligo or amenorrhea, which is the partial or non-menstruation. And then you have hirsutism, which is excess hair growth. You have the characteristic polycystic ovaries, which is, its namesake. Infertility, of course, acne, obesity, and insulin-related issues. So Most of all the cases of PCOS are diagnosed through a process called the Rotterdam criteria, which is 3 symptoms that you have to be diagnosed with PCOS. But most doctors will only test for 2, because if you have at least 2 of them, you don't need to do the test for the 3rd. So if a patient comes in and they're not ovulating and they're not menstruating, that's the first one, which is oligo or anovulation, which means partial or no ovulation. Hyperandrogenism, which if a patient is showing signs of excess hair growth, extreme acne, things of that nature, you already can see that there's a heightened level of androgens because you're showing signs of that. So a blood test isn't really necessary sometimes. And then the characteristic polycystic ovaries, which are usually found through either ultrasound or laparoscopy, but like I said, if you test positive for the first 2, you really don't need to do the test for the 3rd. But a lot of patients will, a lot of doctors will try to, we'll try to tell a patient that it's not necessary, but to some patients that's important to be diagnosed and have the test run for all 3, just for their own mental sake and things of that nature. So here was an example of an ovary that I found that can kind of show you better. So this is the process of how that, when FSH enters, it prepares the follicle where the eggs are made, and from about here, the egg is then sent up the fallopian tube where it can be where it can go to the uterus. Well then, if the process is working right, the follicle is then empty. It then fills with a little fluid, and it turns into a corpus luteum, where it then just eventually disintegrates and the process starts over. In PCOS, since the egg isn't developing correctly, the follicles continue to build up and they fill with pus, which causes cysts. Here's some more symptoms of, you can see the acne and then the excess hair growth. And then another thing that's commonly associated with PCOS is like a male pattern baldness type thing. So you can see that kind of here. And then here's another one with some of the hirsutism type aspects of it. And then treatments for PCOS. So PCOS as a whole, since there's really no distinct cause of PCOS, it's only things that we can believe to lead to PCOS, there is no real treatment for it. You can of course treat the symptoms. So there's treatments for the hirsutism. You know, you can have waxing and or electrolysis, things of that nature to remove the hair. There's medications to counteract the weight gain and the insulin resistance and things of that nature. And then, of course, for the infertility-based things, there's IVF and multiple fertility treatments. And then, in cases where the polycystic ovaries are causing issues, you can remove the ovaries. You can have surgeries to do that. And then I found a couple of drugs that kind of are used a lot of the times in PCOS, and I thought some of them were pretty cool. So the first one you have is progestin, which is a synthetic form of the progesterone, which is another one of those hormones that's really important in the steroidogenesis process. You have clomiphene, which is also known as Clomid, which is an ovulation-inducing drug, and what it does is it is a synthetic form of the FSH, so it basically goes directly into the process and tells the ovaries to produce an egg. You have the electrolysis, like I said, for the hair removing. And then you have spironolactone, which is actually a blood pressure medication, but it's used a lot of the time in women with PCOS to treat the acne and the excess hair growth and things of that nature because it reduces the levels of testosterone in the body. And then you have cyproterione, which is an anti-androgen, which does the same thing. It reduces the levels of testosterone in the body. That one works by blocking the LH receptors, so it doesn't allow the process of steroidogenesis to happen at all. And then we have a little bit of PCOS awareness. So September is recognized as the PCOS Awareness Month, and then it's commonly associated with this with this teal ribbon, which is kind of similar to the breast cancer ribbons and things of that nature. And it's also down there on my board. And then these are my sources. There's a lot of them. And then I'm done.
Thank you.